Every time you quit, you relapse. You wonder if you'll ever escape. But what if the problem isn't just the habit, it's something deeper? As a porn recovery specialist, I'll show you the real answer. No fluff, just what actually works. Fun. Okay, so there's 3 things we're gonna cover in this video today. So the first, and this is really actually the most important, is the roots-based approach. And this is literally the difference maker right here. I mean, if you just kind of nail this thing, you're gonna be good to go. But I'm not gonna stop there. We also need to talk about the 3 major obstacles that cause people to view pornography in the first place. And actually not just to view pornography, but what keeps people addicted. There's 3 in particular. I guarantee you have at least one of these, probably all 3 in your life to some degree if you're watching this video. And then the third thing is what I call the secret sauce. And this is the kind of stuff, what I'm gonna share here. This is the only stuff that you can get from somebody who's really been helping people in this area for a long time. So these are like some pro tips, but I got one in particular that's really gonna help you, okay? So let's start with the roots-based approach. Let's get a little bit deeper on this. This is your life, okay? We all have it. And look, I guarantee you, if we talked long enough and we talked about your life, we would find out that you got some pretty good things going on in your life. I'm sure it's not all doom and gloom. I'm sure there's lots of good fruit hanging from this tree that we're gonna call your life. Now, when we talk about having a roots-based approach to recovery, we're not really talking necessarily about these things. What we're talking about is these little buggers here called weeds. Okay, so you got these weeds growing in your garden, right? Struggling with porn, struggling with lust, you're struggling with masturbation, maybe you're having affairs or you're paying for sex or whatever it is, these are your weeds. Now, what most people are gonna tell you is, hey, just slap on an internet filter, right? Because if you have an internet filter, it's kind of like, ta-da, you kind of you remove the weed and everything's good. Now this works in theory, right? In theory, if we could just put an internet filter that kind of hacks at the weed here and make sure that, okay, the weed doesn't come back anymore, it's gone, I got my filter, I'm good to go, that all makes sense. But there's a problem, okay? The problem is this tree does not just exist above the surface, this tree that we call life, right? We know that this tree has a root system. And the root system is actually very complicated. It goes deep into the ground. It goes far and wide. If there's other trees around, the root systems are connected. I mean, the root system of any tree is actually very, very complicated. And unfortunately, when you have a weed growing in your garden, it actually has a very complicated root system as well. And that root system gets intermingled with the other root systems that exist in your life. And this is why pornography is actually so destructive, because the roots can go quite deep. The root can start to really take a toll because they start to mix in with other things in your life that are ordinary and normal. And that's why people who watch pornography, initially they just have normal lives. It's not a big deal. But then eventually, as these root systems get more intermingled and you have normal life things happening, but then you're kind of watching pornography and you're kind of watching more pornography and you're kind of becoming more reliant on pornography, now all of a sudden it becomes, intermingled. It's affecting your marriage, it's affecting your spiritual life, it's affecting your confidence and everything else that comes with it. So the problem with internet filters is that they've only dealt with things at a surface level. Okay, this is also the problem with street counting and white knuckling, and I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to stage 3, why those are such terrible ideas and what you can do instead. But the reason we need a roots-based approach is because if we don't get rid of the roots, then we know that as long as we cut this off with some willpower or we mustered up some courage to, try to go 30 days or, whatever it is, the problem is, as long as the roots are here, these weeds eventually grow back. And sometimes they grow back bigger, right? You probably experienced that even before. You quit, you did amazing, and then all of a sudden these uncontrollable urges came and you didn't know how to handle it. So when we talk about a roots-based approach, what we're talking about is, we'll do some external measures to, deal with the issues here. But what we really want is we actually want to get rid of these problematic, faulty roots that are causing us all of these problems in the first place. And the same way that it would kind of take like a surgical approach to actually get to the maladapted roots and keep the healthy roots intact, I'm going to show you, as we talked about the 3 obstacles, what you need to focus on. Because if you focus on the right things, you can actually do what I just did. You can literally just remove the bad roots, keep the good stuff in place, and move forward with your life. And I'm telling you, I've helped over 1,000 guys quit porn. This roots-based approach works, but we can't just stop here. Like, this is good theory. And like I said, this mentality, that mindset shift, that alone is enough to really help you, hopefully. But we need to get a little more specific. What exactly are the roots and what do we need to do to address them? We're gonna talk about that next. So now we've established that we need to have a roots-based approach. So we kind of get that, what that is. And I left the picture up there just so that you can remember. The second thing that we need to talk about is the 3 major obstacles, or really these are the 3 major roots that every single person has in their life if they're struggling with a compulsive sexual behavior like pornography addiction. So the first one is emotional immaturity. I've worked with thousands of men. I've spoken to tens of thousands of men. I mean, really, that's how much we reach a week now. And this is by far the biggest thing we spend the most time on initially when we're helping somebody quit pornography. And the reason is your emotions and your sexuality are very intertwined. They're very interconnected. And so when we don't mature emotionally as men, what happens is these immature, undeveloped parts of us still exist, but they're now in an adult body. An adult body that has responsibilities and taxes and bills and maybe dependents if you have kids or a spouse that you're providing for. And so this emotional immaturity is what actually leads to our acting out. We don't know how to handle the cares of life effectively, and so we end up watching pornography. When we talk about emotional immaturity, there's really 2 things that we're actually very concerned with, okay? And the first is our thoughts. Now, I'm always going to get some flack about this because it's like, oh, those are thoughts and feelings are separate. But actually for a guy, they're not really that separate. They're way more interconnected than we'd realize. And so we have a goal when it comes to combating emotional immaturity or developing that maturity. And that is actually let me write this differently. That is to define thoughts. Okay, now I want to shout out to my friend Andrew Blackwood, who is one of my areas. In my area, he's one of the best psychotherapists that we have. And he says that emotional maturity really is about defining thoughts and labeling emotions, okay? Now, there's a lot of ways we can do both of these things. For most guys, if I asked you like, hey, what do you think about this? Or what did you think about your day today? You could probably get into this pretty quickly, right? Labeling emotions is where we get stuck. Now, you might be wondering, like, how could this even really be related to watching pornography? I'm gonna show you in a minute. The emotions thing is interesting because what I found with most guys is either that you weren't really allowed to express yourself and show emotions and have emotions, or if you were, there was only one that was acceptable. Can you guess what it is? Any idea? Now, I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself, but when we start talking about the second root that we need to address, which is trauma, the one thing that we find is that if you look at mainstream pornography today, 80% of it has violence and aggression that's expressed by the man, typically towards the woman. And the reason is because we actually tend to sexualize our emotions. And because men are usually only allowed to express anger, sexualized anger has become very, very popular, very common in the content that people watch today. And I'm going to break that down and explain why in a minute. What we need to know for this, though, for labeling emotions, the really important thing here is if we can understand when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling stressed, sad, angry, also when you're feeling happy, because pornography can be very rewarding, and sometimes when we're on cloud 9, that's when we tend to like kind of overdo it, and then we end up watching pornography or binging. If we can understand what what's going on with our emotions, what we're kind of doing is imagine you sort of have this sequence of events, right? So you have like you have a trigger, okay, and the trigger leads to we'll call them edging events, okay? So these are things that are kind of leading up to a slip, and then you eventually relapse. Okay, any emotion that you might experience is a trigger. And if we can nip this thing in the bud, if we can label our emotions, kind of get ahead of them, we become way less likely to actually go further down the path that eventually leads us to a relapse. So the reason it's powerful is if you can say, I'm angry, I feel angry about this thing, and I know that if I don't do anything about my anger, I'm way more likely to kind of go down this path. It might be a day or two, it might even be a couple of weeks for some of you watching this, but I know that if my anger goes unprocessed, eventually it leads here. Then we can do something about that anger. And if we can do something about your anger or about your sadness or about your overwhelm and your distress, that's another really big one. Probably the only other thing that guys are really allowed to show is that they're distressed. If we can do something about this that's maybe a little bit more healthy and productive, like going for a walk, talking to a friend, journaling, spending time with God, if faith is part of your life. If we can find healthier outlets for this, we can actually just stop this from going any further downstream. And that's a very powerful place to be. So the goal for combating emotional maturity, in maybe a shorter phrase, is we want to build self-awareness. That's the actual goal here. And if we can effectively build self-awareness, we can actually reduce the amount of times that we're caught between a rock and a hard place. Because this is what most people do in recovery, right? We already talked about this. They install the internet filter, you muster up a bunch of willpower, and you end up doing very, very little to actually get to the roots. And so when you take this approach, what happens is you always end up down this path. And right when you're kind of here, you're just about to encroach, that's when you start to implement some strategies. And it's just way too late at that point. The goal is to get upstream. And if we can implement strategies up here, building self-awareness by defining our thoughts and labeling our emotions, then we can actually make a lot more progress a lot faster. And we're way less likely to catch ourselves in these really difficult moments that require a lot of willpower and a lot of energy to actually be successful. The second obstacle is trauma. Now, I can't do like a full deep dive on trauma in this video, but here's what I want you to understand, okay? This is really, really important. The content, the temptations, and the fantasies that you have are clues. Okay? Here's the reality. Most guys, they get to this part and they're like, okay, this one, I'll give it to you, Sathiya. Like, I know I kind of need that a little bit more. But this one, like, I don't have trauma. Like, I was that guy. I don't have trauma, had a good upbringing, stable home, parents loved each other, nothing to really worry about. So I kind of said, I don't have trauma. But then I learned this, that the content, the temptations, and the fantasies, that's not supposed to be a strike through there. I'll put that underneath. These are not coincidences. There's a reason that you watch the content you watch. There's a reason that certain things tempt you and other things don't. And there's a reason that you fantasize about very specific things. And instead of ignoring them, which is kind of what the typical approach is, right? It's like bounce the eyes, ignore it, suppress it, stuff it, find something better to focus on. And look, I get it. I understand where we're coming from with that. We don't want to give something undue attention, right? Or make it worse. I get that. But the reality is these are actually clues. And by suppressing them, we are throwing away some of the greatest insights into our healing process. Just to be a little bit more direct. If you are struggling with compulsive viewing of pornography, you cannot stop on your own. You've tried and you haven't been able to do it successfully. This is at play in your life to some degree. It might be a 3 out of 10, it might be a 10 out of 10, but I can guarantee you this is at play. And so the thing that we want to pay attention to is the specifics around our content, the content we watch, what we're tempted by, and our fantasies. Now, let me give you an example. This is a personal example. I was addicted to porn for 15 years. I had a very specific genre of pornography that I viewed. And this genre is actually a top 5 genre year after year across all the major porn sites. Now, as I got into this second category, what I realized is Part of what was contributing to my viewing of pornography was my relationship with my mom. And I was really surprised by that because I love my mom and she loves me and we have a good relationship. But what I discovered is that when I was a little boy, when I was young, my mom is not a very expressive person. She's kind of more reserved in her personality. So she didn't express love the way you'd maybe expect it. There weren't a lot of hugs and kisses, not even a lot of words of affirmation. She was more present, took care of the basic needs. And I realized that I actually grew up feeling neglected. Just at an emotional level, I felt like I wasn't sure if I was actually loved and lovable. And so that's why I watched pornography. Pornography gave me this chance to feel loved. It gave me this interaction with a woman at a very intimate level that I had never experienced before. That's why I watched a lot of mom-based content like stepmom, MILF, all that kind of stuff. And so the content, the temptations to some extent, and the fantasies were all reflecting my trauma. Something that had existed in my life that was not this catastrophic event, but just a dynamic in the relationship that actually left unmet needs that I was sort of temporarily satisfying through pornography. When I say trauma, this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. And if you pay attention to the content, the temptations, and the fantasies, you will find clues into your solution. I'm telling you, if I would have neglected this area, I would still be addicted to porn. I wouldn't be doing this video, and I certainly would not have been clean for 9 years, okay? There's a reason that this is so powerful, and it's because if we pay attention to this, we get clues about what our heart actually wants, and then we can come up with healthier solutions. And so what I call this process in recovery, this is what we call healing the heart. And this is really where the magic happens. This is where you're gonna start to feel a shift. Like, okay, something is different. I'm not the same person. I can tell something is happening to me that I'm not the person I was before. And that's a really beautiful thing. Okay, the third thing is limiting beliefs. So with limiting beliefs, this is, I think, a little bit easier for us to understand, especially if you're a guy and you're watching this. But the thing that happens is we have these two arenas of our lives, okay? One is called behavior, and the other is called identity. And in theory, if we're really healthy, functional adults, these two things kind of have like an interplay. Like they play off each other, right? So for me, I introduced myself at the beginning of this video as a porn recovery specialist. So that's kind of like, I've helped a lot of guys quit porn. And so there's a career identity there of I'm a specialist. Okay, that makes sense. But what happens is these typically don't interplay and we see them separately. What happens typically is these two things actually start to overlap. And so instead of having a healthy identity that's actually, influenced by your behaviors, but not necessarily dictated by it, you basically get one big lump. And what that means is I'm a porn addict because I watch pornography. My behavior is I watch porn and I can't stop. So my identity is I'm a porn addict and I don't have value, I don't have worth, etc., etc. And these limiting beliefs not only stop you from accomplishing all that God designed you to accomplish in this life, but actually more problematically is if you believe that you're a porn addict or that you're this hopeless, worthless guy, if that's your identity, if that's your belief, then you're never gonna quit porn because that's your identity. And so when it comes to limiting beliefs, what we really wanna address is we wanna figure out what are the lies that are going on underneath the surface that are driving our sense of self. And if you feel resistance to this, it's probably because this is a little bit uncomfortable. But the question we want to ask here is, what are the lies? And if you feel that resistance, I want to just encourage you, this is where your greatest breakthrough is going to happen. Any of these, wherever you felt the most resistance, that's the area you need to focus on the most to actually get the best outcome. So what are the lies? What are the things that are driving your sense of self? Because if you can identify those lies, address them, replace them with the truth, that's what's going to actually lead to a healthy belief system. And a healthy belief system, I'm just going to put this here, replace with truth. A healthy belief system is what's ultimately going to lead you to better behavior, okay? So another way that we can put this, just to kind of drive the point home a little bit more, is behavior is actually the byproduct of our beliefs, okay? So it goes in reverse order. We often think like, whatever I act on, that's what determines what I believe about myself or who I am. It's actually the inverse order. So if you have bad beliefs are going to lead to bad behavior. I'm a porn addict, I'm hopeless, it'll never work, all that kind of stuff. That's going to lead to bad behavior. But if you can start to shift your belief system, your behavior is going to follow suit. And this is usually if people go properly through the recovery journey, this is where you hear about the stories of guys getting a six-pack that they always wanted, starting that business they always wanted, being a better husband to their wife. I mean, it starts earlier, but once the limiting beliefs get disrupted and you actually start to believe the truth, that's when your life really changes. And so what we want to do here is, if you're dealing with limiting beliefs, the ultimate goal is to shift your identity. And this is kind of the clincher in tackling our three major obstacles. So now what we want to do is, after we tackle these three big obstacles, is we want to apply some of our secret sauce. We want to tie all this together and really guarantee that the effort we put forth here is going to get the maximum result. That's the most frustrating part about recovery, right? Is you spend all this time, energy, maybe even money, and then it doesn't even really get you the outcome you want. And if you stop here, you're still at a risk of that happening. We're going to talk about the secret sauce so that you can be sure that this is going to get the max results for you. All right, my friend, well done. Okay, we're doing really well. We've talked about the roots-based approach. We just went through the three obstacles that hold people back. And what I want to teach last is just the secret sauce. Okay, some things that can tie all of this together. Because one thing that a lot of people try to do is you'll watch a video like this, you're like, okay, I think I get it. And then you move on. And I want to make sure that you are set up for as much success as possible. So this is going to be very quick, just a few bullet points. But the first thing is, do not count streaks, okay? Streak counting is a losing game. Nobody cares about your streak. What we want to do instead is track trends. Because let's say you go 60 days without porn. Now, if we're counting streaks, that might be really good for you. So you're like, man, I got the streak going, and then day 61 you slip. Now, what happens if your goal is to streak count and you slip on day 61? You're back to zero, right? So this messes with our psychology. Like earlier we talked about limiting beliefs. Streak counting reinforces limiting beliefs. It's like, oh, I'm back to square one. Okay, now let's imagine we're tracking trends. Well, on day 61, if you have a slip, trend-wise, you've had one slip in the last 60 days. You've had 60 days clean, one day that was not clean. And that's pretty darn good if you ask me. So we want to track trends because the more we can zoom out, the more it means that we can move forward even if we do have a failure, a slip, a binge, whatever it might be. So tracking trends is really valuable, especially when you have a roots-based approach and you're focusing on the three obstacles we talked about. Because then we can continue to monitor our progress by, am I developing emotionally? Am I addressing my trauma? Am I believing better things about myself? Those are actually better indicators than just counting a streak. So if you're going to do anything metrically, track trends. Second, secret sauce. Okay, this is like the mayo, ketchup, and the mustard. We're putting it all together. Okay, the second secret sauce by far, if you get nothing else from this part of the video, let it be this, connection. Okay, all of the research, I mean, I was a university researcher for several years. I always pay attention to what's going on in academia in regards to addiction and porn use and all that stuff. All of the research suggests that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And this is actually not a new thought, it's an old thought, but it just gets reinforced again and again with every study and every survey. The more you can find connection in your life, the more likely you are to make better decisions, to stay on track, and if you fall short, for it to not be this downward spiral, but you just kind of keep moving forward. Now, I can tell you in my community that has hundreds of guys currently pursuing freedom from pornography, the amazing thing about connection is you can actually do these three things that we talked about earlier way more quickly because you have other guys that you're learning from, you're doing it together, you're brainstorming, you're not doing this all alone. And that is incredibly de-shaming, which, as we know, shame drives a lot of the addiction in the first place. So connection is very, very powerful. And the last secret sauce, and really everybody can do this, but this also goes a long way, is make sure that you have an expert or a guide. So this could be a therapist, it could be a coach, it could even just be that you listen to some content to guide you along the way, like today's video. But I find that having somebody who's ahead, not somebody who's actually ahead, that's actually not the right way to say it. Somebody who's achieved the outcome that you want, the way that they think, the things they're gonna tell you to do is gonna be different than somebody who's just maybe a couple steps ahead. Nothing wrong with that. That would fall into this category here, you know, an accountability partner or somebody that can mentor you and guide you. But having somebody who's already climbed the mountain, they're gonna get you to the top the most successfully. And these are my 3 big recommendations if you really wanna get the most out of what we discussed today. So hopefully you can tell from this video that breaking free from porn is possible, but there is more for you to know. YouTube thinks this video is perfect for you. They might be right. So click now, take the next step. I'll see you there.